We often believe that life must go according to our plans, that circumstances should align perfectly with our desires. And when they don't, when everything seems to go wrong, we feel as though we've been betrayed, as if life itself has turned against us. But what if, instead of resisting these moments, we could find peace and even joy in them? You see, the problem lies not in the circumstances, but in how we interpret them. We've been conditioned to think that life should be smooth, predictable, and always in our favor. But life in its nature is wild and unpredictable. It ebbs and flows like the ocean. Sometimes the tide is high, and everything feels effortless. Other times the tide is low, and we feel stranded. But the ocean doesn't apologize for its waves, it simply moves. Now, imagine trying to control the waves, to hold them back or push them forward according to your will. It's an impossible task, isn't it? And yet this is precisely what we do in life. We try to control the uncontrollable, and in doing so we create tension and frustration. But what if we learned to ride the waves instead of fighting them? What if we allowed ourselves to flow with life, even when things seem to be falling apart? This is not about denying the reality of hardship or pretending that everything is fine. No, this is about recognizing that our suffering often comes from our resistance to what is. We want things to be different, and in that desire we create our own misery. But when we let go of that resistance, something remarkable happens. We find a strange sense of freedom. Think of it like this: when you're caught in a storm, you can either fight it, cursing the rain and wind, or you can dance in it. The storm doesn't care either way. It will pass in its own time. The only thing that changes is your experience of it. In that dance you find a way to feel good, not because the storm has ended, but because you've embraced it for what it is. When everything is going wrong, we are being invited to see life from a new perspective. We are being asked to let go of our rigid expectations and to trust in the natural unfolding of things. Just as the darkest nights give birth to the most beautiful dawns, our struggles are often the prelude to transformation. And here's the paradox: by surrendering to the chaos, by embracing the discomfort and uncertainty, we actually begin to feel a sense of peace. Because we're no longer fighting life. We're no longer demanding that it be something other than what it is. We're simply being with it as it is. In this state, we begin to realize that wrong is just a label we've applied to moments we don't like. But life doesn't operate in terms of right or wrong, it simply is. It's only when we step back and observe without judgment that we can see the beauty in the mess, the order within the chaos. So the next time everything seems to be going wrong, take a deep breath and remind yourself this is part of the dance. The ups and downs are part of the rhythm of life. And when you stop fighting it, when you let go of your need for control, you'll discover that even in the midst of turmoil, there is a way to feel good, to feel alive. Life, in its most authentic form, is unpredictable. It moves in ways we cannot foresee, offering moments of joy and sorrow, success and failure, without warning or explanation. This uncertainty can be unsettling, because we have been conditioned to seek security and predictability in all aspects of our lives. From a young age, we are taught to plan, to strategize, to anticipate the future, so that we might avoid difficulties and control outcomes. But no matter how meticulously we plan, no matter how hard we work to ensure that things go right, life inevitably throws surprises our way. And when it does, when things don't go as we expect, we often react with fear, frustration, or disappointment. We see life's uncertainty as a threat, something to be tamed or overcome. But in doing so, we miss the point entirely. For life, in all its chaos and unpredictability, is not something to be controlled. It is something to be experienced. To embrace life's uncertainty is to understand that the very nature of existence is fluid and ever-changing. The tides rise and fall, the seasons shift, and the circumstances of our lives evolve, often in ways we could never have anticipated. The struggle arises when we cling to the illusion of control. We believe that if we plan well enough, work hard enough, or stay cautious enough, we can make life conform to our expectations. But this belief is rooted in a misunderstanding of how life works. Life does not follow a straight line. It is not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be completed. Rather, it is a dynamic, ever-changing process, filled with both beauty and difficulty, joy and sorrow, all intertwined in a dance that we cannot fully predict or command. Imagine standing on the edge of the ocean, looking out at the vast expanse of water. The waves roll in, sometimes gently, sometimes with great force. You cannot stop the waves, nor can you predict exactly how each one will move. But you have a choice in how you respond. You can stand there, resisting the power of the ocean, trying to hold back the waves with sheer willpower, only to exhaust yourself in the process. Or you can step into the water, letting the waves carry you, trusting that you will find a way to navigate them. In many ways, life is like that ocean. It is vast, powerful, and beyond our control. And yet we often act as though we can dictate its movements, as though we can hold back the tides of change and uncertainty. But the more we resist, the more we suffer. When we try to control life, we place ourselves in opposition to its natural flow. We create tension and anxiety because we are constantly trying to make life something it is not predictable and manageable. But life, by its very nature, is neither of these things. To embrace life's uncertainty is to recognize that our need for control is often the source of our suffering. We think that by controlling external circumstances, we can create a sense of security and stability within ourselves. But real security does not come from external conditions. It comes from within. It comes from cultivating the ability to remain calm and grounded even when life is unpredictable. This inner security is not dependent on things going our way. It is rooted in the understanding that we are capable of navigating whatever comes our way, even if we do not know what that will be. This does not mean that we abandon all plans or aspirations. It is perfectly natural to have goals and to work toward them. But it is important to hold those plans lightly, to understand that life may take us in a different direction, and that this is not a failure on our part. It is simply the nature of existence. When we release our attachment to specific outcomes, we create space for life to unfold in unexpected and often beautiful ways. We become more open to the possibilities that we could not have imagined, the opportunities that arise precisely because things did not go as planned. There is a profound sense of freedom that comes from letting go of the need to control life's outcomes. When we stop trying to force life to fit into a particular mold, we begin to see it for what it truly is, a process of constant change, a series of moments, each offering its own lessons and gifts. Some of these moments will be joyful, others will be challenging. But all of them are valuable, and all of them are part of the greater whole. When we embrace uncertainty, we also become more present. We stop living in the future, constantly worrying about what might happen, or trying to prevent every possible negative outcome. Instead, we ground ourselves in the present moment, recognizing that this is the only moment we truly have. And in this moment, even in the face of uncertainty, there is beauty to be found. There is life to be lived. There are experiences to be savored, even if they do not match our expectations. In truth, life's uncertainty is not something to be feared. It is something to be embraced because it is what makes life dynamic and alive. It is what allows for growth, transformation, and discovery. If everything were predictable, if we always knew what was coming, life would become stagnant, and we would miss out on the richness of the unexpected. So the next time life throws you a curveball, pause for a moment. Instead of reacting with frustration or fear, take a deep breath and remind yourself that this is part of the journey. Trust that. Just like the ocean, life has its rhythms, and while you cannot control them, you can learn to move with them. You can learn to ride the waves, to find balance in the midst of uncertainty, and to discover that even when life is unpredictable, there is still joy, peace, and meaning to be found. In embracing life's uncertainty, you embrace life itself. And in that embrace, you find the freedom to truly live. Resistance is a powerful force in our lives, but not in the way we often think. It's not the external obstacles, challenges, or setbacks that cause us the most suffering. It's the internal resistance we create in response to these difficulties. We push against life, trying to mold it into something more comfortable or familiar, something that aligns with our expectations. We resist change, discomfort, and uncertainty, believing that if we fight hard enough, we can bend reality to our will. But this resistance only leads to frustration and pain, because we are fighting against the very nature of life itself. Life is dynamic, ever-changing, and unpredictable. No matter how much we plan or try to control our environment, things will often unfold in ways we didn't expect or want. Yet, instead of accepting this fluidity, we resist. We cling to the idea that life should be a certain way, that events should unfold according to our desires. When they don't, we feel betrayed, frustrated, or even angry. But this feeling comes not from life's unpredictability, but from our resistance to it. When we resist what is happening in our lives, whether it's a minor inconvenience or a major life event, we create a kind of inner tension. This tension is a form of struggle, a battle between what we want and what actually is. And the more we fight, the more this tension builds. It manifests as stress, anxiety, anger, or sadness. We convince ourselves that if we just resist a little harder, if we push back more forcefully, we can force things to go our way. But life is not something we can control or conquer. It moves according to its own rhythms, and our resistance only causes us to suffer more deeply. Letting go of resistance does not mean giving up. It does not mean passively accepting everything that happens to us without effort or intention. Instead, it means recognizing that our attempts to control life are often futile and counterproductive. It means understanding that while we can influence certain aspects of our lives, we cannot dictate every outcome. And more importantly, it means realizing that our internal resistance, the thoughts, emotions, and judgments that arise when things don't go as we planned, is often the true source of our suffering. Think of resistance as a tight fist. When something happens that we don't like, we clench our mental and emotional fists, trying to grasp control. But the tighter we clench, the more tension we create within ourselves. This tension doesn't change the situation, it only makes us feel more anxious, angry, or fearful. Now imagine what happens when you open that fist, when you release the need to control the situation. The tension dissolves, not because the situation has changed, but because you've changed your relationship to it. This is the essence of letting go of resistance. It's about changing how we relate to life's challenges, rather than trying to change the challenges themselves. When we let go of resistance, we stop fighting reality. We stop insisting that life be different than it is, and we start accepting it as it comes. This doesn't mean we resign ourselves to suffering or hardship. Instead, it means we approach life's difficulties with a sense of openness and curiosity, rather than with fear or frustration. Imagine being caught in a strong current while swimming. The natural instinct is to fight against the current, to try to swim back to shore as quickly as possible. But this often leads to exhaustion, panic, and eventually being swept away. A more effective approach is to relax, to go with the current for a while, until you find a place where the water is calmer and easier to navigate. By not resisting the current, you conserve your energy, and you increase your chances of finding a solution. In life, the current is always moving. Sometimes it takes us in directions we don't want to go. But fighting the current only makes things worse. By letting go of resistance, by flowing with life's currents rather than against them, we can navigate challenges with greater ease and clarity. Letting go of resistance also involves letting go of the stories we tell ourselves about how life should be. We all carry around mental narratives, ideas about what our lives should look like, how other people should behave, what success and happiness should feel like. These stories often become rigid, and when reality doesn't match them, we resist. We feel as though life is not living up to our expectations, and we respond with frustration, disappointment, or resentment. But life doesn't follow our scripts. It has its own plans, and those plans often don't align with our expectations. When we let go of resistance, we also let go of these rigid narratives. We become more flexible, more willing to adapt to life's changes and challenges. We stop insisting that life conform to our desires, and instead we meet life where it is. This flexibility allows us to respond to challenges with greater resilience and creativity. It frees us from the need to control every aspect of our existence and opens us to new possibilities that we might not have seen before. One of the most profound effects of letting go of resistance is the sense of peace that comes with it. When we stop fighting life, we stop creating unnecessary suffering for ourselves. We begin to experience a deeper sense of acceptance, not just of the external world, but of ourselves. We accept that we are not in control of everything, and that's okay. We accept that life will bring both joy and sorrow, success and failure, and that all of these experiences are valuable in their own way. Letting go of resistance is an act of trust. It is trusting that life, in all its unpredictability, has a wisdom of its own. It is trusting that we have the capacity to navigate whatever comes our way, not by resisting or controlling, but by flowing with it. This trust allows us to remain open to the present moment, to experience life as it is, rather than constantly wishing it were different. Our perspective shapes how we experience the world. It is the lens through which we interpret events, relationships, and even our own selves. Often we move through life believing that our perspective is reality, that the way we see things is the way they are. But perspective is not reality, it's simply our personal interpretation of it. And when we recognize this, we open ourselves to a profound transformation. By changing our perspective, we can change our experience of life itself. Many of us live with a fixed mindset about how things should be, how people should behave, and how the world should work. We create expectations and ideals that, when unmet, lead to disappointment, frustration, or anger. These reactions are natural, but they stem from a single assumption, that the way we see the world is the only valid way to see it. This is where the trouble begins. We lock ourselves into a narrow view of life, believing that if things don't align with our perspective, they are somehow wrong or flawed. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in front of a large painting in a gallery. From where you're positioned, the painting looks dark and chaotic. It might even make you uncomfortable, as you struggle to find meaning or beauty in the image. But if you take a few steps back or move to the side, the same painting might reveal new colors, patterns, and depth. The chaos you initially saw might suddenly make sense within a broader context, and what once seemed unappealing or confusing now appears rich and complex. This shift in perception didn't change the painting itself, it changed how you viewed it. The same applies to life. The circumstances you face, the challenges and joys you encounter, are the same. But by adjusting your perspective, you can transform your relationship to them. One powerful way to change your perspective is to recognize that life is not happening to you, but for you. This doesn't mean that every experience will be pleasant, or that suffering isn't real. Rather, it means that each event, whether positive or negative, carries an opportunity for growth, learning, or self-discovery. When we approach life from this angle, we begin to see challenges not as obstacles to our happiness, but as essential parts of our journey. Take, for example, failure. Most people view failure as something to be avoided at all costs, as an experience that diminishes their worth or undermines their goals. From a fixed perspective, failure is simply a dead end, a sign that things have gone wrong. But what happens if you shift that perspective? Instead of seeing failure as a stopping point, you can begin to see it as feedback, as a guide that helps you refine your approach, learn from your mistakes, and grow stronger. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, famously said that he did not fail thousands of times, but rather found thousands of ways that didn't work. His perspective transformed what could have been a story of repeated failure into one of resilience and perseverance. By changing how we view failure, we unlock its hidden potential. Failure becomes not something to fear, but something to embrace as part of the process of success and self-discovery. Another powerful shift in perspective comes when we stop labeling events as good or bad. These labels are not inherent in the events themselves. They are judgments we apply based on our preferences and expectations. But life is not divided into neat categories of good and bad. What we often consider to be negative experiences can later turn out to be the very things that lead to our greatest growth or joy. Consider a person who loses a job they love. In the moment, this experience feels deeply painful and unfair. From one perspective, it is a loss, a negative event. But as time passes, that same person might find new opportunities, discover passions they didn't know they had, or even end up in a career that is more fulfilling than the one they lost. From this broader view, what initially seemed like a disaster reveals itself to be a turning point, a necessary step towards something better. This doesn't mean that we should ignore or suppress our emotions when difficult things happen. It's important to honor how we feel in the moment. But it's also important to remember that our initial perspective is not the whole story. When we step back and allow time and reflection to broaden our view, we often find that what seemed like a curse was, in fact, a blessing in disguise. Changing your perspective also means recognizing that other people see the world differently than you do. We often fall into conflict with others because we assume that our perspective is the right one, and that if others disagree, they must be wrong. But everyone's perspective is shaped by their own experiences, beliefs, and challenges. By acknowledging this, we create space for empathy and understanding. We learn to listen to others not just with the intent to respond, but with the intent to understand. This shift can transform relationships. Instead of approaching conversations with a rigid mindset, trying to defend our point of view, we become more open to hearing where the other person is coming from. This doesn't mean we have to agree with everything they say, but it allows us to see that their perspective is just as valid as ours. In doing so, we build bridges of understanding and compassion, rather than walls of judgment. and division. Perspective also has a profound impact on how we view ourselves. Many of us carry around narratives about who we are, often negative ones. We tell ourselves that we are not good enough, that we are failures, that we are unworthy of love or success. These stories, born from past experiences or internalized beliefs, can shape how we live our lives. But just as we can change our perspective on external events, we can also change the way we see ourselves. By shifting from a perspective of self-criticism to one of self-compassion, we begin to see our flaws and mistakes not as evidence of our inadequacy, but as part of our humanity. We start to understand that we are not defined by our past, by our mistakes, or by the stories others have told about us. We have the power to rewrite our own narrative, to view ourselves through a lens of kindness and acceptance. Perspective, after all, is not fixed. It is fluid, adaptable, and entirely within your control. And by changing your perspective, you change your life.